Hey, so tonight I want to share something personal. It's the kind of thing I used to keep buried. One of those memories that doesn't feel like it's allowed to hurt anymore because it was so long ago, or kids are just mean, or you're overreacting. But pain doesn't come with an expiration date. And some wounds don't fade. They just grow quieter until one day they speak up in the worst way. It started like any normal week, but it didn't end that way. It was a Monday morning, cold and gray like most of them. I was late. Of course, my favorite coffee shop had a broken espresso machine, and my train was delayed. By the time I stepped into the lobby of my new office building, I already felt off balance, a little disoriented. The kind of morning where you just know something's going to go wrong, but you don't know what yet. I'd started this job just 3 weeks ago. It was a marketing firm, sleek, modern, full of people who wore blazers like second skin and said things like brand synergy without cringing. I was new, but hopeful. It felt like a fresh chapter after years of toxic workplaces and being overlooked. This time, I told myself things would be different. The receptionist gave me a tight smile and pointed toward the elevator. "All hands meeting today," she said. "Conference room C." I nodded, adjusted my bag, and stepped into the elevator. As the door slid shut, my stomach tightened. Conference room C was on the 12th floor, the top. I'd only been up there once for onboarding. It was mostly used for executive meetings. When the doors opened, I was greeted by chatter and the faint clink of coffee cups. People milled around, finding seats, checking their phones. I took a seat near the back and started scrolling through emails, trying to seem invisible. And then I heard it. A voice. A laugh. Light, confident, sharp. It scraped across the back of my mind like nails on old glass. I looked up. She walked in like she owned the room, which, as it turned out, she did. A tailored blazer, red lipstick, eyes that scanned the crowd and knew exactly where the power sat. She paused to greet someone, her hand landing gently on their shoulder, and then she turned, and our eyes met. For a second, the room went completely still. I forgot how to breathe, because standing there 13 years after middle school ended was her. Megan Harper, my childhood bully. The girl who once stuck gum in my hair on the bus, who turned my entire friend group against me in 8th grade, who called me muleface so many times it stuck for years. She looked right at me, a flicker of recognition, maybe, or maybe I imagined it. Then she smiled, wide, white, and moved on. I sat frozen in my chair, my hands gripping the edge of the seat so tightly they started to go numb. Was this some sick coincidence? Had I misremembered her face? Had she changed? Had I? I didn't know yet, but something primal in Metha Kid, who once locked herself in the bathroom to cry after lunch, was already screaming. After the meeting started, I learned what I needed to know. Megan wasn't just a face from the past. She was my new supervisor, my boss. And she didn't remember me or pretended not to. I spent the rest of that meeting in a strange fog, barely able to concentrate on the slides about Q3 projections or product launches. Every time she spoke, I flinched. Every time she smiled, I remembered something else, her laugh echoing in the hallway as I picked up my spilled books, the way she once read my private diary aloud in gym class. By the time the meeting ended, I wasn't sure what reality I was standing in. Back at my desk, I stared blankly at my screen. Everything inside me was tight and hot, confused, angry, humiliated. I was 29, not 14. I was supposed to be past this. But memory doesn't follow logic. It follows scent, sound, fear. And all of it was back. I didn't tell anyone that day, not my coworkers, not my partner at home. What would I say? "Hey, funny story, my childhood bully is now my boss. Small world, huh?" So I kept quiet. But deep down, something old and unfinished had just been cracked open again. And I had no idea how much it would bleed. I didn't always have words for what she did to me. Not back then. When you're 12, the world is still black and white, right and wrong, friends and enemies. But what Megan did wasn't playground teasing or harmless fun. It was methodical, pointed, cruel in a way that felt personal, like she could see right through to the softest parts of me and knew exactly where to press. She didn't hit or shove. That would have been too easy to explain to a teacher or parent. No, she used whispers, looks, inside jokes that excluded me by design. And she was clever. She never acted alone. Megan Harper made sure she always had a circle of followers, girls who laughed when she laughed, copied what she wore, and carried out her silent orders without needing to be asked. I still remember the first day it changed. One day, I was eating lunch with Anna and Tashemi, best friends since 3rd grade, and the next, they wouldn't even sit with me. I didn't understand why. I hadn't done anything. I kept asking if I said something wrong, but they just shrugged or said, "Megan told us not to talk to you. That was it." And Megan? She'd just smile. "Don't take it personally," she said one afternoon when I finally got the courage to confront her. "You're just not that fun anymore." That was 6th grade. From then on, I stopped getting invited to birthday parties. I'd walk into a room and hear laughter fall silent. I found notes in my locker mocking crude things, and once, someone left a dead flower on my desk with the words, "You're already wilting," written underneath. No one ever got caught. I'd go home and tell my mom, and she'd say, "Just ignore them, sweetie. They're probably jealous." Jealous? Of what? I was shy, awkward, and didn't know how to dress myself yet. I wore my feelings on my face, couldn't hide disappointment, and cried too easily. I wasn't strong or pretty or loud. I was target-shaped. That year, I started eating lunch in the library. I told the librarian I loved books. She believed me, and in a way, I did. But mostly, I just needed somewhere I could sit without feeling watched. Somewhere I didn't have to explain the tightening in my chest every time I heard Megan's voice echo down the hallway. That voice haunted me for years. It got so bad I started pretending to be sick. My attendance dropped. My grades slipped. I went from being a kid who loved school to someone who dreaded every single weekday. Looking back, I don't think anyone really saw it. Teachers called it drama or girl stuff. My parents said I needed to toughen up. Even I started wondering if maybe they were right. Maybe it was my fault. Maybe I was too sensitive, too clingy, too weird. That's the thing about emotional bruises. They make you question your own reflection. You start to see yourself the way your bully does, weak, unwanted, invisible. But the worst part wasn't what Megan said. It was the way everyone else just let it happen. Anna and Tasha didn't stand up for me. The other girls didn't look away. The boys laughed when Megan mimicked my voice. It was like she had rewritten the script of who I was, and everyone played along. By 8th grade, I'd stopped trying to fight it. I shrank instead. I wore clothes that helped me disappear. I stopped raising my hand. I trained myself to smile at the right times, nod at the right moments, avoid eye contact in the hallways. Survival became a kind of performance. I played the role of fine so well that I almost believed it myself. But late at night, when everything was quiet, I'd lie in bed and replay her words. That cruel smile. That way she made me feel like the space I occupied in the world was too much, too loud, too wrong. I think the reason it hurt so much wasn't just what she did, it was how much I believed her. That was the bruise I carried into adulthood. Even after high school, even after therapy, after moving cities and changing jobs, I still flinched when someone said my name too loudly. I still doubted compliments. I still second-guessed every social interaction. Like Megan had installed this quiet little voice in my head that whispered, "You're not enough. You'll never be enough." I thought I'd silenced it. I thought I'd grown past her. Until I saw her standing in that conference room smiling like she hadn't broken me. That's when I realized some ghosts don't show up in dreams. They show up in blazers, holding your quarterly review. The irony was almost too much to bear. After all these years, all that internal work, I'd ended up back in her orbit, not just casually professionally. Megan Harper had climbed the ladder of corporate life and was now holding the very position that determined my career growth. The girl who once spread rumors about me behind lockers now held my performance evaluations in her perfectly manicured hands. I don't know how I made it through the rest of that week. Each morning I'd sit on the edge of my bed, my coffee going cold on the nightstand, debating if I could call in sick again without raising eyebrows. But I went. I always went. Because that's what we do, right? We show up, we survive, even when we're splintering inside. I kept wondering, does she recognize me? I'd changed. My hair was shorter, dyed darker. I wore makeup now. My voice was steadier, my posture straighter. Maybe she didn't make the connection. Or maybe she did and was pretending not to. That ambiguity gnawed at me. One morning, a coworker named Jordan stopped by my desk. He was new too, friendly, disarming in the way golden retrievers are. "You know Megan?" he asked casually. "She's intense, huh?" I didn't answer at first, just nodded. He laughed, leaned on the edge of my desk. "I swear she reads minds or something. I blink wrong. She raises an eyebrow. You ever get that?" I forced a smile. "She's definitely sharp." It was the first time someone else acknowledged her presence as unsettling. But Jordan moved on, oblivious, and I sat there wondering how many of us she'd rattled. One night, after a particularly tense staff meeting where Megan had dissected a proposal I'd worked on for days line by line, in front of everyone found myself walking aimlessly through the city after work. The autumn air was crisp, leaves skittering across the sidewalk. I passed lit windows of restaurants, couples laughing over drinks, a violinist playing on the corner, and I felt like a ghost. It wasn't just humiliation I felt in that meeting, it was something deeper, familiar. It was that same old script: you're not good enough, you'll never be good enough. Except now it wore a blazer and used corporate language to deliver the same verdict. I sat on a bench in the park and texted my old therapist, someone I hadn't seen in over a year. I typed and deleted the message 5 times before finally sending, "Can we talk? Someone from my past just reappeared and I'm not okay." She replied the next morning. We booked a session for the weekend. When we spoke, she asked, "What are you hoping for?" And I didn't know how to answer. Because I didn't want revenge. I didn't even want an apology. I just wanted to not feel 12 years old again. I wanted to stop questioning my worth every time I heard her heels click down the hallway. She told me something that stuck. Closure doesn't always come from the person who hurt you. Sometimes it comes from reclaiming the narrative. I sat with that for days. And I started digging through old journals, trying to remember who I was before Megan twisted me into someone smaller. I found an entry from 7th grade. It said, "I want to be a writer. I think I'm good with words. Megan said my story was boring, but I don't think that's true. I hope I can prove it someday." Reading it felt like holding hands with my younger self. She wasn't boring. She was brave. She kept writing even when no one was listening, even when they laughed. And I'd forgotten her. That was the worst part. I had let Megan win out because she was still in my life, but because I'd let her shape the parts of me I'd stopped loving. I'd carried her voice longer than I ever meant to. So I started writing again, just for myself. I wrote about those years, about the hallway humiliations and the lunch table silences, about the ache of not being chosen, the shame of being called too sensitive. And slowly, the fog started to lift. Not because anything changed at work. Megan was still Megan. But I was starting to remember who I was without her shadow. It was a Thursday morning when I heard her voice again, closer this time. Not in a meeting, not across the office floor, but just behind me in the hallway outside the break room. I had just poured a cup of lukewarm coffee, waiting for the machine to cycle again, when I heard her laugh. Not loud, not forced natural, like she was happy, comfortable. That laugh. It had followed me through dreams and middle school hallways, warped and distorted by memory. But here it was, unchanged. I froze, coffee sloshing slightly in the cup, and felt my chest tighten. Then she walked in. "Morning," she said cheerfully, as if we were co-workers who'd known each other for years. I managed a quiet, "Hey," without looking at her. She stepped beside me, reached for the sweetener packets. I caught a faint trace of her perfume, sharp and floral, like gardenias with too much sugar. I remembered that smell. She used to wear body spray in middle school that gave me headaches. "Big day ahead?" she asked, still casual. Was she making small talk, being polite, or testing me? "I guess," I murmured. She glanced at me. "You've been doing great, by the way. I really like your pacing on the Dixon account." I blinked. Compliment from her? It threw me. I gave a tight smile and nodded. "Thanks." And just like that, she walked away, heels clicking down the tile like punctuation marks in a language only she understood. It was the most normal exchange I'd had with her since the day I realized who she was. But instead of feeling reassured, I felt more unmoored. Was she being genuine? Was it possible she really didn't remember me? That our entire shared history had been erased from her side? I went back to my desk and stared at my screen, the document open, cursor blinking. That interaction played on repeat in my mind all day, and a strange part of me, shamed, desperate, wanted her to remember. Not because I wanted revenge, but because I needed acknowledgement, proof that it happened, that I wasn't crazy, that I wasn't clinging to some exaggerated version of the past. Later that afternoon, our team had a brainstorming session for an upcoming product launch. Megan led the meeting, her energy focused and commanding. She praised Jordan's concept. She asked questions. She nodded as I presented my draft slides, even smiled once. It felt wrong. She was being too nice, too professional, like none of the past ever happened. Like she'd never called me names, never erased me from my own circle of friends, never made me eat lunch behind the library stacks because the cafeteria became unbearable. I left that meeting with a storm in my chest. That night, I opened my journal and wrote something raw. "I'm so tired of waiting for her to remember. I want to scream, 'You did this to me. You made me question my worth for a decade, and now you get to forget?'" The next day, I decided to test her. Not in some dramatic, confrontational way. Just a nudge. I walked into the break room where she was alone, scrolling on her phone. I said casually, "Hey, did you grow up around here?" She looked up, smiling. "No, actually small town, couple hours away. Why?" I swallowed. "Just thought you looked familiar. Did you go to Eastbridge Middle School?" A beat. She tilted her head, eyebrows pinching slightly. "Wow. Yeah. That was forever ago. You too?" I nodded slowly, my heart thudding so hard I could feel it behind my eyes. "That's wild," she said, laughing softly. "Small world. What year?" "Same as you," I said. She stared for a second longer, lips parted, thoughtful. Then, "I feel like I'd remember you." It felt like a slap dressed up as politeness. I smiled. "It was a big school," I said. She nodded. "Yeah, middle school was weird, wasn't it? Kids are awful." Then she went back to her phone. That was it. The moment passed. She didn't remember, or didn't care, or maybe chose not to remember. And I sat there, coffee cup in hand, pretending my chest wasn't unraveling. She got to forget. And I didn't. The worst part of working under Megan wasn't the overt power she held over me. It was the invisible undercurrent, the tension of never knowing when the past would suddenly flicker into the present, or when a word, a look, a half smile would send me reeling into a memory I thought I had buried years ago. By now, I'd stopped hoping for some grand moment of recognition. She didn't remember, or she pretended not to. Either way, the burden of memory was mine alone to carry. And yet, I still tried to play the role of the competent professional. I arrived early, stayed late, took notes, said thank you even when she ignored my contributions in meetings or subtly reworded my suggestions and claimed them as her own minutes later. No one else seemed to notice. Or they did, and chose to stay silent. That's the thing about people like Megan. They know how to keep their cruelty just beneath the surface. They don't yell or threaten. They use suggestion, silence, exclusion. All invisible weapons that leave no bruises. One Friday, we were assigned a new client, an edgy startup run by 20-somethings who wanted bold, disruptive branding. Megan assigned me as project lead. I was thrilled. This could be the one thing that helped me break through the fog and be seen for my work, not just my past. I threw myself into it. I interviewed the client, sketched out strategy, built an entire deck overnight that pulsed with energy. I felt proud. For once, I felt enough. We had a presentation scheduled the following Wednesday. On Tuesday afternoon, Megan asked to review my deck privately. I walked into her office, laptop open, heart racing. She clicked through it in silence. Slide after slide, no reaction. When she reached the last one, she looked up. "It's good," she said flatly, "but I think we'll go with something more aligned with our brand voice." I blinked. "Sorry, though, you mean you want revisions?" "No," she replied, already pulling up another file. "I've drafted a version I'd like to present instead. Feel free to take notes at the meeting." She didn't look at me again. I left the room feeling like I'd been hollowed out. That night, I sat in my apartment with the lights off, watching my own PowerPoint slides flicker across my computer screen in the dark. All that work, all that hope, gone. She had erased me. Again. This time, not from a lunch table but from my own creative labor. I couldn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard her voice. "You're just not that fun anymore." The words she said to me back in 6th grade echoed into my adult life, into this moment, like some kind of prophecy. I didn't cry. I was past crying. It was worse than that. I felt numb. And then, I felt something else. Anger. Rage even. The kind of righteous fury that comes not from being hurt, but from realizing you let it happen again. That you made yourself small to survive. That you tried to be professional, polite, neutral when what you needed was to speak. I opened my laptop. I started typing an email. Not to HR, not to her. To myself. A letter. A letter from me now to the girl I used to be. Dear me. I'm sorry. I'm sorry I didn't defend you then. I'm sorry I let her take your voice. I'm sorry I carried her story of who you were for so long I started to believe it. You are not weak. You were never weak. You survived. And now we get to decide who we are. I closed the laptop, heart pounding, hands trembling. It wasn't a victory, but it was something. It was the first time I stopped asking Megan for acknowledgement and started giving it to myself. The next morning, I walked into the office. I took a deep breath, and I started to plan how I would take my voice back. Not from Megan, but for me. I didn't make any big moves that day. No dramatic confrontation, no explosive emails. but something inside me had shifted. It was subtle, more of a decision than an action. A decision to stop playing the role of the passive version of myself, the one who flinched every time Megan walked by, the one who stayed quiet because she believed her thoughts were less valid. Instead, I decided to show up, as me, fully, and without apology. The change didn't go unnoticed. A few days later, in a strategy meeting, Megan presented her updated campaign concept to the client. It was polished, sure, but it lacked the spark, the pulse I knew they were looking for. When the room fell into a long, contemplative silence, I did something I never would have done a month ago. I cleared my throat and said, I actually created an alternate concept based on the client's early feedback. Would it be okay if I shared a few of those insights? Everyone turned toward me, including Megan. She gave a polite smile, but her eyes, they narrowed, just slightly. Of course, she said, the words dripping with forced sweetness. So I did. I pulled up the original deck I'd poured my soul into, the one she'd shelved without hesitation. I focused on the audience, not on her. And I spoke with the clarity of someone who knew what they were saying mattered. The client loved it. By the end of the meeting, they asked to blend both versions using Megan's structure but my creative direction. It was a small win, but it was a win. Afterward, Megan didn't say anything. She simply walked out of the room with her notebook held tightly to her chest, her jaw a little tenser than usual. And then the real game began. It wasn't obvious at first. It started with small things, a calendar invite I was excluded from, a team email where my name was conveniently left off, projects I was suddenly too busy to handle even though no one had asked me. At first, I thought I was imagining it. But then I overheard Jordan at the printer. She's been weird lately, he said to another colleague, especially around my name. You notice that? So it wasn't just me. That made it worse, somehow, because I wasn't crazy. She was doing it. Again. And this time, we were adults, grown professionals. Yet the same patterns repeated like a song I'd never been able to turn off. I tried to talk to her once. I sent a meeting request with a vague subject line. Quick catch-up? She accepted. When we sat down in a small glass-walled office, I tried to keep my voice calm. I just wanted to check in, I began. I've noticed a bit of distance lately. If there's something I could be doing better, I'd really appreciate the feedback. She blinked, then smiled. I think everything's fine, she said in that same syrupy tone. Maybe you're just overthinking things. It's a stressful quarter. And there it was. The gaslight. The subtle invalidation. The way she turned the conversation into something about my perception, not her action. I left that meeting feeling like I'd been tossed into a cold pool with my clothes still on. But I didn't shrink back this time. Instead, I started documenting dates, emails, exclusions. I kept a quiet little record of it all, not because I knew what I was going to do with it, but because I wanted proof. Not for HR. For me. Proof that I wasn't imagining it, that it was happening. And that this time, I saw it for what it was. One night, I stayed late. The office was quiet, lights dimmed. As I gathered my things, I noticed a notebook had been left in the conference room. Curious, I peeked at the cover. It was Megan's. I hesitated, then opened the first page not to snoop, but to confirm it was hers. And there it was. My name. Scrawled in her tight, looping handwriting, a few notes about a meeting, and one line circled in red. Doesn't take direction well, too eager. My throat went dry. Too eager? It felt like middle school all over again. Every compliment I'd ever earned, every success I thought I'd claimed, reduced to a single bitter line in her private script. But I didn't take the notebook. I didn't confront her. I didn't even mention it. I just closed it, left it exactly where I found it, and walked out. That night I stared at my ceiling for hours. The rage burned low in my stomach. And then I whispered out loud. To no one. I don't care if she ever sees me clearly. I care that I do. And with that, I made the next big decision. To stop letting her take up space in my head. Not by forgetting, but by refusing to let her define anything anymore. Because people like Megan, they only win when we believe their version of who we are. And I was done letting her write that story. I'd love to say that from that point forward, everything got easier. It didn't. Choosing to reclaim your voice doesn't mean the world stops testing you. It means you meet the tests with different tools. And some days, I still failed those tests. There were moments I caught myself walking faster down the hallway when I heard her voice, or shrinking in meetings when she leaned too close to where I sat. I still second-guessed emails I sent, still over-apologized in Slack messages. Still held my breath when performance reviews came around. But I also started building something new, something sturdier than pride. Self-trust. It began in small ways. I started volunteering to lead more presentations. I offered to mentor the new intern. I stopped defaulting to silence when Megan subtly undermined me. I'd calmly rephrase, clarify, reclaim. Not with venom, with clarity. It was hard, really hard. There were days I left work and collapsed on my couch, emotionally raw, mentally exhausted. But then, something surprising happened. A few teammates started coming to me for advice, asking what I thought about projects, looping me into brainstorms before they went to Megan. Jordan even said once in passing, "You know, this place would fall apart without you." It wasn't a grand compliment, but it landed. I'd spent so long shrinking under the shadow of one person's version of me, I hadn't noticed I was slowly becoming someone new, someone others trusted, and that confidence built momentum. I began documenting more actively, not just the microaggressions, but my wins. Emails where clients praised my work, Slack messages thanking me for guidance, slides where my ideas became the foundation for something bigger. I wasn't just collecting receipts, I was building evidence for myself. So when the next big blow landed, I was ready. It came during the quarterly review cycle. Megan called me into a private office, the blinds were half closed, her expression was unreadable. "I've been reviewing your performance," she began. "And while you're consistent, I've noticed a reluctance to take feedback." I sat up straighter. "Can you clarify?" She tapped her pen on a notepad. "It's subtle, but I get the sense you think you're above collaboration. There's an energy of resistance." There it was. That carefully chosen language that said everything while revealing nothing. An attempt to reframe assertiveness as arrogance, autonomy as insubordination. I let her finish. Then I reached into my folder and pulled out a packet I'd prepared, notes from projects I'd led, client feedback, collaborative emails, peer reviews. I slid it across the desk. She looked surprised. "I hear your concern," I said quietly, "and I want to grow, but I also want to be sure we're aligned on what collaboration actually looks like." Her face didn't change, but her fingers stiffened slightly around the pen. "I'll take this into consideration," she murmured. I nodded, stood, and left the room with my head held high. Was it a confrontation? Number. But it was a boundary. It was the moment I stopped playing defense. Later that evening, as I packed up for the weekend, I caught a glimpse of myself in the office mirror near the elevator. I looked, calm, not triumphant, not vindicated, just whole, like I had finally stepped back into my own skin. And I realized maybe the point wasn't to win against Megan. Maybe the point was to no longer need her validation at all. She couldn't take anything from me anymore. Because I had finally decided what I was worth and I didn't need her to confirm it. The day I snapped wasn't a meltdown. It wasn't a shouting match or a dramatic walkout. It was quiet, controlled, precise. And maybe that's what made it so powerful. It happened in the middle of an all-hands team meeting, a regular Thursday check-in where project updates were shared, goals reiterated, and wins were celebrated. I'd been working late nights on a client launch we'd fast-tracked at Megan's request. She'd trusted me with more responsibility, she said, which really meant she handed me a mess of vague directives, then ghosted on every decision until the last minute. Still, I showed up. I filled the gaps. I stayed sharp. I even earned an enthusiastic thank you from the client's CEO during our wrap-up call the day before. So when Megan stood in front of the team and began her recap, I waited. She talked about how successful the launch was. She mentioned tight deadline. She praised the client for being a dream to work with. She even joked about how her late nights were finally paying off. But she never said my name. Not once. I sat there staring down at my notes, my heart thudding in my ears. I waited. Maybe she was building up to it. Maybe she just forgot. But when she moved on to the next topic, like I hadn't just carried an entire campaign on my back, something inside me cracked open. I raised my hand. It wasn't planned. It wasn't rehearsed. She paused. "Yes?" And I said calmly, steadily, "Just to clarify, are we referring to the Winslow launch? The one I led?" Silence. Half the room looked up from their notes. A few people glanced between us. Megan's expression froze. "Yes," she said, measured. "Of course. You were part of the team effort." "Right," I said. "Except I was the point person. I coordinated creative, handled client approvals, and resolved the vendor issue that nearly delayed the campaign by a week." There it was. My voice, my presence, my truth. She gave a tight smile. Yes, you did contribute significantly. And I let the silence hang, not because I needed more praise, but because I needed the room to see, to hear it, to feel what it was like when someone tried to erase you in plain sight and you stood your ground. The meeting moved on, awkwardly, but the tone had shifted. Afterward, Jordan stopped by my desk. "You good?" "Yeah," I said. He grinned. "That was badass." I smiled. "It wasn't meant to be." He shrugged. "Maybe, but someone needed to say it." And that was the moment I realized something crucial. It wasn't just about Megan anymore. It was about every time I'd let someone diminish my work because I didn't want to seem difficult. Every time I'd bitten my tongue to stay likable. Every time I swallowed the truth because I was afraid of being seen as too emotional, too loud, too much. This was bigger than Megan. This was about me. Later that day, Megan called me into her office. I expected tension, but what I got was calculation. She sat down, legs crossed, voice even. "I hope you know I wasn't intentionally excluding your contributions this morning." I met her gaze. "I know what I contributed. I just wanted to make sure the team did too." Another pause. Then she said, "You're becoming very assertive." It wasn't a compliment. It was a warning. "I'm becoming very honest," I replied. And I watched something flicker behind her eyes, a tiny fracture in the mask. She didn't speak after that. I walked out of her office, not triumphant, but clear. Clear that I didn't need her permission to take up space. Clear that no amount of silence could shrink me again. And clear that I'd crossed an invisible line. The old version of me would have backed down. But that version was gone. I didn't walk into HR with shaking hands or a rehearsed monologue. I walked in with a folder. A folder filled with timelines, emails, meeting notes, and journal entries, me quiet evidence. Because after the meeting where I stood up, things shifted in ways that were impossible to ignore. Megan didn't lash out. She didn't yell. That would have been too easy, too visible. Instead, she turned up the temperature by just a few degrees, enough to boil if you weren't careful. Suddenly, I wasn't being invited to client calls I was supposed to lead. Slack messages went unanswered or answered hours later with clipped responses. I was given fewer projects but expected to report more often. She called my tone defensive in one-on-ones, said she felt tension but couldn't quite name the cause. Every tactic was subtle, calculated, designed not to be provable but to wear me down inch by inch. It worked, for a time. I started waking up with chest pain. I avoided lunchrooms. I turned down invitations. I cried in the elevator twice, but I also kept documenting. I trusted my own perception. I clung to the facts. I reminded myself over and over, this is real. This is happening. This is not in your head. The final straw was an email. Megan forwarded client feedback on a campaign praising the concept, the tone, the visuals, and wrote only 2 words. "See below." No mention that I created it, that I worked weekends, that I carried the concept from scratch to delivery. Just "see below." And I snapped, not in rage, in resolve. I scheduled a meeting with HR. I walked in with that folder, and I sat across from the repo woman named Simone, and I told my story. Not the middle school part, not at first. Just the facts. The patterns, the passive aggression, the exclusion, the erasure, the double standards. I spoke clearly, not as someone seeking revenge but as someone who was done whispering to herself in dark corners. Simone listened, took notes, asked clarifying questions, nodded. Then she said something I hadn't expected. "You're not the first person to raise concerns about Megan." That hit like a wave. Not because it lessened my experience, but because it confirmed what I had begun to believe. It was never just me. I wasn't the problem. She was. And maybe she always had been. I left that meeting lighter. No outcomes were promised. No swift justice delivered. But that wasn't the point. The point was I'd chosen myself. I'd broken my own silence. I'd drawn the line where no one else ever had. Over the next few weeks, things shifted quietly. An HR rep sat in on our next team meeting. Megan's tone softened. Her authority suddenly had eyes on it. I wasn't sure if it was enough, but it was something. And for the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. Reporting her didn't erase the damage she caused, but it gave me something I never thought I'd have. Closure. Not the dramatic kind, not an apology, or breakdown, or reckoning, but the quiet kind. The kind that says, "You didn't imagine this. You were right to speak. You were brave to draw breath where silence once lived." I walked home that night beneath a pale sky, autumn wind brushing my face. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel small. I felt whole. Healing isn't linear. I used to think once I confronted the problem, once I stood up to her, spoke out, made my voice heard, I'd feel free, healed, done. But the truth is, healing doesn't come all at once. It comes in echoes. In quiet mornings when your chest doesn't tighten at the sound of your own name, in late nights when you remember something painful and no longer flinch, it comes in silence, in stillness, in the space where anger used to live. A few weeks after the HR meeting, Megan stopped coming to the office. Officially, she was transitioning to a remote leadership role, but anyone who'd been in corporate long enough could read between the lines. I didn't ask questions. I didn't celebrate. I didn't share what had happened with anyone, though I'm sure the whispers made their way through the walls. Her absence felt surreal at first, like someone had turned off a noise I'd learned to live with. One afternoon, I stepped into conference room C3, the same room where I'd first locked eyes with her all those months ago. It was empty. Sunlight pooled across the table. The projector was humming gently. I stood there for a moment, remembering how I'd gripped the seat that first day, how my throat had tightened, how I'd wanted to disappear. And now I stood tall, not triumphant, but solid, whole. I sat down, opened my laptop, and began typing a letter. Not one I would send, just one I needed to write. Megan, I don't need an apology. I needed to remember who I was before you rewrote me. I hope you find peace. I hope I do too. I closed the document, saved it without naming it, and shut the laptop. That night, I called my mom. We hadn't talked much about my school years. I think she always sensed something was wrong back then, but didn't know how to name it. This time, I told her everything. The name calling, the lunches alone, the journal, the years of feeling broken. There was silence on the other end of the line for a moment. Then she said softly, I'm so sorry I didn't see it. You didn't deserve that. I know, I whispered. And I did. I knew. Not just in theory, not just because the therapist told me so, but in my bones. I knew. That weekend, I walked past my old middle school while visiting family. The building was smaller than I remembered. The playground rusted, the fence chipped, but the memories were still there lingering like echoes, like shadows. I didn't go inside. I didn't need to, because I wasn't that girl anymore. I was the woman who came back, who stood up, who remembered herself. And I realized something else. This story wasn't about Megan. It never really was. It was about me, about the way I carried pain like a second skin, about the way I learned to unzip it piece by piece, about the way I stitched a new version of myself not from rage but from truth. And maybe that's what healing is. Not forgetting, but reclaiming, rebuilding, remembering that the girl who hid in the library stacks was already brave. She just needed time to believe it.